Hey, I'm here at the RM Sotheby's Hershey Auction Preview. We're going to take a look at some of the fantastic cars that are going to be offered for sale here. As always, after each car, I'm going to give you the final hammer price for that car. Now, without further preamble, let's go take a look at some cars. All right, in honor of October, we're going to start things off with a professional car. This is a 1929 Cunningham hearse. These draperies that you're looking at are actually carved wood panels. Among 1920s hearses, this would be considered very high-end. Not only do we have all of the intricate carving, but the chassis is a Cunningham. Cunninghams were makers of very high-end luxury cars, but also carved out a niche for themselves in the professional car market of hearses and ambulances. This 29 would be towards the end of the Cunningham run. The 1930s, as we all know, were not kind to luxury brands, and Cunningham disappeared in 1931. I have seen this car before. It was a longtime participant at the Henry Ford Museum Greenfield Village Old Car Festival. It's changing hands today for $74,500. There were a number of cars at the auction that I was looking forward to covering but just couldn't. There was threat of impending rain, so many of the cars that were parked outside were covered over, so I'm just not going to be able to cover those. They did have some big tents to keep many of the cars dry, so there's no fear of getting any water on your Amphicar. Most people think of the Amphicar as an American car. It is actually not. These were made in Germany using Triumph engines, although most of them were exported to the United States. This was made for the American market. That's why this one with right-hand drive is unusual. If we look at the logo on the steering wheel, you see a castle there that kind of gives hints as to its German heritage. This is actually built by a company called the Quant Group. Anyway, these amphibious cars were imported from 1961 to 1968. They're kind of rare, but you do see them around. If you haven't guessed by all those louvers in the back, this is a rear-engined car, and I think that the way that the hood opens over to the side there is kind of neat. Anyway, you could have owned this one at the auction for $97,750. I do want to point out that the numbers I'm giving you are a little bit higher than the Sotheby's published numbers because my source for auction results also includes auction fees. And yes, that was a very high price for an Amphicar. Let's take a look at some pre-war luxury here with this 1933 Hispano Suiza J12 coach. This car has an interesting history. This chassis was originally assembled at the Barcelona plant for the domestic Spanish market, but it was never completed. The body that you see here is from a different Hispano Suiza and was fitted to the chassis in 1976. Most recently, this car served as a parts donor for the restoration of another J12, so some pieces are missing. The original 12-cylinder engine is in place, but the carburetors are missing. The transmission is out of the car, but comes with and is in pieces. So this is a Hispano Suiza V12 project, which is interesting. I wonder if they measured the height of the fender against the height of that curb before they backed up. Anyway, the catalog notes that the interior is 100% intact, although a lot of the serial numbers on the car are all mismatched, which is what you would expect from a car with this history. Anyway, if you were looking for an interesting project, you could have had this one for $86,250. Speaking of interesting, who among us has not always wanted a 1943 white M3A1 half-track? The A1 in this case marks an improvement over the earlier M3 with a 50 caliber machine gun mount over the front passenger seat. This particular half-track carries the insignia of the old breed, 1st Marine Division. Even though it is a large red 1, don't confuse it with the big red 1, that's the Army. There's also some art on both sides labeled Sergeant Lena B. This is presumably Sergeant Lena Bastogne, wife of legendary Marine John Bastogne. John is a Medal of Honor recipient who was killed just 7 months after getting married. Anyway, back to the A1. This is a troop carrier that is in LMG or light machine gun configuration. Here as we look inside, we can see that it is full of period-correct details. In addition to racks of the correct M1s, we have no less than 2 30 caliber machine guns. This is in addition to the Browning 50 caliber that's mounted up front. In the United States, it's actually legal to own these guns, but the licensing comes with certain restrictions. One of those restrictions, of course, is that you don't leave them unattended at car shows. That means that these examples have been decommissioned and cannot be made to fire. Up in the cab, everything is correct, as you would imagine. This is where you would guide this over 9-ton machine down the road or make your own road somewhere. Over here, oh, I almost missed the fact that there is a Thompson submachine gun mounted under there. Tricky. Remember that the Tommy gun, mostly associated with 1920s era gangsters, was also military issue. Anyway, this beautiful machine could have been yours for $82,500. That's cheaper than the Amphicar. I still can't get over the price on the Amphicar. Anyway, up next we have another white. This one is a little more rare. This is a 1937 white Glacier National Park tour bus. These buses, as well as the drivers, became known as jammers for all the gear jamming necessary to go up and down the hills at Glacier Park. Amazingly, of the 35 buses originally supplied to the park, 33 of them are still in operation, with one wrecked and one preserved. Those 33 operational buses have, of course, been upgraded over the years and have modern drivetrains. That top that you see there is canvas and can be rolled back for open-air driving. The bus that you see here was actually supplied originally to Yellowstone National Park, but has been restored using Glacier National Park colors. Because Yellowstone retired most of its buses early on, that means that this one still retains its original drivetrain. I actually am mildly amused by the fact that the license plate bracket design means that you kind of have to bend the license plate a little bit to make it fit. Anyway, the white inline 6 engine used to propel this big bus around is different than the inline 6 used to propel that big half-track around. I thought for a second they might be the same, but the half-track most likely uses a Hercules engine. Anyway, this would make a great parade vehicle, or actually it would be fun to take to Glacier Park and just drive around and confuse the park rangers when you're clearly out of position and they can't raise you on the radio. It changed hands at the auction for $341,000. Next, let's step inside the Hershey Lodge and take a look at some of the very high-end cars that were on display there. This is a 1931 Marmon V16 two-passenger coupe with body by LeBaron. Yes, you heard me right. That is a V16 engine under the hood. In fact, Marmon was the first manufacturer to produce a V16. The V16 in the two-door coupe configuration is an incredibly rare body style. Now I know what you're thinking. Independent luxury car brand, 1930s. This is not going to end well. Au contraire. This story actually ends better than most. You see, Marmon joined forces with a guy named Arthur Harrington and started selling four-wheel drive components under the name Marmon Harrington. This is a company that, incredibly, is still around today. Now, if you saw the step plates on that rear bumper, that means that there is a rumble seat back there, so you can take some additional passengers. It has a golf bag door and a actually gigantic one. It doesn't look so big in this picture, but this car is really big. You got enough room in there for the bags for your entire foursome. Anyway, not many of the V16 Marmons have survived, and it's estimated that there are only about 6 of the coupe body style left. This auction was your chance to snap this one up and been king of your local cruise-in. It was bid to $625,000. Not enough to meet the reserve. Now this is an interesting car. What this is a 1908 Panhard Levasseur Type Q race car. René Panhard and Emile Levasseur are the two founders of the company that would eventually just be called Panhard. It's one of the earliest car companies, selling their first car in 1890 using Daimler engines under license. This car has a huge 10.5-liter engine, or 645 cubic inches. That's in 1908. It delivers about 50 horsepower, which is fairly impressive for this early on. Power is transferred through dual chain drives. It also has an air-operated starter. The car was originally sold through a Parisian agency to a man named Don Pedro Suenaga of Jalapa, Veracruz in Mexico. His driver, Agustin Caso, raced the car in Mexico with photographic evidence of the car still racing as late as 1920. The car was discovered in the 1940s being used by a Mexico City convent. Yes, this car was being driven by nuns. They had added a back seat so they could, carry more nuns. The car has since been restored to its race configuration. I really like the cord-wrapped steering wheel to give you that extra grippiness on the turns. That hand-operated pump that you saw on the side, that's an air pump for pressurizing the air above the gas tank. Gives you a little bit more boost. I thought this was interesting. Around front, the steering drag link has a stiffener added that's held in place with wrapping. Notice that the drag link actually sits in front of the axle, so it's possible to clock something and really screw up your steering. Not that clocking something with your axle is too much better. I mean, hitting things in general is just bad. Anyway, I mentioned earlier there's a photograph of this car racing in 1920. Actually, it's passing a Mercer in that photograph. But there's also a photo of it at a speed trial in 1910. These were incredibly useful in making sure that it was restored back to its original configuration. Although, aside from the back seats, I'm not really sure how much modding out the nuns had really done. I really like just the gigantic oiler for the car. From here, you can actually monitor and really add oil as you're driving. That's something for your riding mechanic to do. Oh, and in case you're wondering, that big oiler, yeah, that's a Lunkenheimer. I checked, because I'm a nerd. The car sold for $623,750. All right, let's move on to just a normal old Chrysler. Here's a 1931 Chrysler CG Imperial Convertible Coupe with body by LeBaron. All right, so I lied. There's nothing normal about the CG Imperial. The new Chrysler design for 31 was the work of Alan Leamy, fresh off his work on the Cord L29. The design for this car was further refined by LeBaron, which at the time was still an independent coach builder. The result is an absolutely fantastic looking car. This is a full-on classic as recognized by the Classic Car Club of America. The CG Imperial Convertible Coupe was the most expensive regular production Chrysler that you could buy that year. When I looked up the production, the figure I got was 10. Base price for the car was over $3,300, or actually over $70,000 in 2025 money. And that's before you can finance these things out for like 30 years or whatever it is you do today. If you wanted to own this very well restored car, you would have had to have bid $280,625. So you want to follow me into a dark parking garage? No? Well, there's old cars in there. Well, okay. Besides, how many dark parking garages roll out a literal red carpet? Look at that thing. Anyway, my apologies in advance. Some of these cars down here are maybe not the best lit. Here's a 1937 Cord 812. This car is often referred to as the 810 812, and here's why. In 1936, they released the industry-first front-wheel drive V8 called the Cord 810. In 1937, they continue production of the car unchanged, but to give the impression that this is a new model, they start calling it the 812. 810, 812, same car. However, starting in 37, you have the option for a supercharger. Along with the supercharger option come those cool exhaust pipes that come out the side of the hood. So, whenever you see these side exhausts, you know you're dealing with a 1937 812 with a supercharger, although not all 812s had that. Anyway, this one is a very nice cabriolet body style that sold for $218,500. Next up, we have this very nice 1910 Marion Model 10 Special Roadster. Oh, by the way, if it seems like I'm hitting the pre-war cars pretty hard, that's because the auction itself has a lot of pre-war cars. If you're looking for me to cover some muscle cars, I'll see what I can find for you before the video ends. I try and offer a variety, but if there's a significant car like this one, I really want to cover it. The Model 10 Special Roadster was a production car that copied as closely as possible a Marion-built race car. This is cool. This is the ignition coil mounted on the dash so that you can adjust the timing from the driver's seat. This car was designed by Harry Stutz. He would leave Marion shortly after this and go on to form his own company and use this design as the basis for the Stutz Bearcat. The Bearcat, of course, is considered by many to be America's first real sports car. Well, here's an earlier version of that, so maybe this is America's first real sports car. Incredibly, this is actually the last remaining Marion Model 10 Special Roadster. So for possibly America's first sports car, it was bid to $192,500. Not enough to meet the reserve, although the story I have is that it sold for an undisclosed amount after the auction. Well, here's a post-war car, 1949 Delahaye 135M with coachwork by Henry Chaperon. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I love Delahaye's, and that goes double for the 135Ms. These are sport-tuned cars featuring triple carbureted inline sixes making 110 horsepower. They were actually very competitive on the track. A pair of 135Ms actually had a 1-2 finish at the 1938 24 Hours at Le Mans. Bodies for these were built by various coach builders, but I've never seen a bad looking one. All of them are just 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, as gorgeous as these cars were, the post-war economy in France was not kind to luxury car makers. Delahaye at this period is in slow decline, and they disappeared after 1954. Just look at the front of this car. Is this not beautiful? Anyway, if you want to see some nice cars, just Google Delahaye and look at images. They're great. Up front here we have the coach builder's tag. That's Henry Chaperon, who I mentioned built the body. This post-war Delahaye was bid at the auction to $140,000, although not enough to meet the reserve. Although, once again, supposedly sold after the end of the auction. Very nice 1958 Edsel Citation convertible. This one with rare factory air conditioning. When it was introduced, the Edsel had a few problems, but none of them were really related to the quality of the car. This one is looking great with the white and turquoise interior. The transmission is push-button operated in the center of the steering wheel, and that speedometer is a rolling dome, which is really cool. The car is actually really highly optioned with dual rear view mirrors. I really like the dual antennas. Those are really cool. Around back we have a Continental kit. Now, as a matter of personal preference, I don't actually care for the Continental kits, although I know that some people really love them. In my view, they always kind of look tacked on. Let me know in the comments what your feelings on Continental kits are. Although they were kind of a flop at the time, Edsels are kind of very much beloved today. This one did change hands at the auction for $115,000. Actually, when it comes to 50s convertibles, there was quite a selection at the auction. I really like that Packard Caribbean. I think we'll come back and do that later in the video. We just saw that very nice Oldsmobile. Here's a 1959 Imperial, and over there is a Pontiac convertible. That's from 1957, and of course the Amphicar. Let's zoom back around and take a look at that Imperial from 1959. This is actually an Imperial Crown convertible. This is the top end of the Chrysler line for 59. Also, this is not a Chrysler Imperial. Imperial at this point was its own brand. Look at that stylized eagle, geez. All of these turquoise convertibles came from the same collection, and the Imperial is wearing the color well in turquoise gray metallic. This is another push-button transmission. This time the buttons are to the left of the steering wheel. I really like that dash-mounted rear view mirror. That is great. Actually, just look at this whole dash. Geez, we used to be a proper country. One of the features of the 59 Imperial is this trunk-mounted spare tire. It's meant to evoke an earlier classic era. I don't know, I think it's kind of a love it or hate it design feature. I actually really like the taillights on these things. As for the trunk-mounted spare, I don't know, it kind of works for me. I don't mind it at all. Anyway, the car sold for $100,625. You like massive station wagons? How about a 1972 Chrysler Town & Country 9-passenger station wagon with yacht paneling? The badging on the side indicates that this one came with the optional 440 engine. The 400 was standard. That's the original owner who owned this car for more than 50 years and maintained it meticulously. In fact, this car is a real time capsule with just a touch over 10,000 miles on the clock. Love the black interior. The black vinyl roof is another option. Also optional are those assisting handles on the back. The tailgate is Chrysler's new 3-way opener, so you can open it like a normal tailgate or swing it open like a door. The rear window is power operated and the rear seats are rear facing. This is the absolute top of the line station wagon from Chrysler for 1972, with less expensive station wagons being offered under the Dodge and Plymouth nameplates. Everything about this super low mileage car just looks new. It's fantastic, and it sold for $97,750. All right, what is this? This, as it turns out, is a 1902 Automoto motorized tricycle. Automoto was a French company that they kind of got their start in bicycles and kind of moved on to cars. The tricycle at this period of time was sold as a kit to be assembled by the owner. It's an interesting thing. It's got a single-cylinder water-cooled engine, makes about 2 horsepower. That tank that you see up on top, that's actually a water tank. The gas tank sits behind the driver's seat. The engine is a bit odd in that you don't really control it with a throttle. The intake is fixed. You control it by a variable exhaust valve. The frame is actually wooden with metal reinforcing, and the rear wheel is driven with a belt. It's kind of an unusual belt too. Here, take a little closer look at that. Actually, really, the more you look at it, the more little kind of weird details that you see. It seems rather, uncar-like. On most early cars of this period, I'm used to seeing a big giant flywheel that kind of smooths everything over. This doesn't have that, so I'm guessing it's actually kind of a rough ride. Also, the steering is just weird. It's the sort of wound cable steering that you would normally see on like a boat. There is a connecting rod between the wheels so that they, track with one another, but there's no drag link. You just steer it by pulling on those cables, or rather winding them around the pulley at the bottom of the steering column. The whole thing seems extremely crude, even by 1902 standards, but, it's bright and eligible, so there's that. It's sold for $15,600. All right, I've seen similar cars to this before, and they're always fantastic. What this is a 1916 American LaFrance fire engine made into a speedster. That engine that you see is a gigantic 6-cylinder, 855 cubic inch engine. That's over 14 liters if you're not used to dealing, in freedom units. Power goes to the rear wheels through a dual chain drive. At some point in history, somebody saw a massively powerful American LaFrance fire engine, probably at a time when they could be had fairly inexpensively, and thought that would make a great, gigantic, and powerful race car. I don't really see a history on this car in any of the notes. I don't think the history of this car is known. It was made, I don't know, maybe in the 50s. And I don't think it has any, actual race history. It's built just as a fun car. Man, it would be a fun car. Just think about how throaty that huge engine would sound as you're pulling into a show. Plus, it's a massive car that commands respect, and you can probably easily pass, say, a Frontenac-equipped Ford. This car changed hands at the auction for $63,250. Now here's a car a lot of people will recognize right away. This is the 1911 Marmon Wasp, first winner of the inaugural Indianapolis 500. Well, not the one. That one's actually in a museum in Indianapolis, but this is a tribute to that car. Reportedly, over 19,000 hours were spent meticulously recreating the original Marmon Wasp. There it is, the first use of a rear view mirror. This allowed driver Ray Haroon to drive by himself without a riding mechanic, a controversial move at the time. In this case, the engine and transmission are 1929 Nash, while the frame and rear axle are 1917 Nash. The end product has been made street legal with all proper lights and turn signals, so you can actually drive this out on the road. For those that don't know, in the United States, actual antique cars are grandfathered in and don't need all the turn signals, but a recreation like this would need to meet current standards. Anyway, this is about as close as you're ever going to get to owning the actual Marmon Wasp, because I don't think they're going to be selling the original one anytime soon. This one did change hands for $48,875. Hey, remember earlier when I was talking about the Stutz Bearcat? Well, it turns out when the Bearcat came out, the competition was already in place in the form of Mercer. If there was such a thing as the ultimate stoplight duel for the late teens, it would have been the Bearcat versus the Mercer Runabout. When this 1921 Mercer Series 5 sporting touring car came out, Mercer was still all about speed. This is the car that says, with all due respect, I'd like to go fast. This example is wearing its original paint, although things like the upholstery and top bows have been replaced. Mercer did offer a roadster and a raceabout, but this sporting body style is perfect if you want to bring along some of your friends. They also offered a touring car that was slightly larger. This one sold for $37,375. All right, speaking of going fast, you're looking at a 1937 Bugatti Type 57 Cabriolet. The car has an interesting history. It was originally sold in 1934 to a Belgian owner and competed in rallies in Europe. At that time, it had a saloon-style body. In 1936, it was returned to the Bugatti factory, and the body was transferred to an updated second series chassis. In 1938, a new cabriolet body was fitted to the chassis by a local Belgian coach builder. So yeah, we have a bit of a Ship of Theseus situation going on here. Anyway, the Type 57 Bugattis are legendary. Look at that fitted luggage, by the way. Prepared Type 57s were very competitive on the track. In fact, one of them won at Le Mans in 1939. In a recent video, I showed you a custom car that drew inspiration on the front end from a Bugatti Type 57, although it drew fender inspiration from the Delahaye Type 135M. In this video, you're looking at the real ones. It's not known for certain who did the coach building on this particular one, just that it was in Belgium. A previous owner fitted a Paul Nee maker's tag on the side because Paul Nee is a likely coach builder, but it's not known 100% for sure. I think we can all agree whoever did it did a fantastic job. I mean, look at that burl dash. Jeez. Also, the lines on this thing are just fantastic. Let's just pull back and take another look at that Bugatti Type 57 front end. Great car. The car did sell for $781,250. This is actually the highest price for any car at this auction. All right, 1926 Marmon D74 two-passenger Speedster. I really like the light-up radiator ornament on this one. Not only do we have Marmon in the front that is lit up, but we have the green light on that side and the red light on the other side, which is, you know, proper lighting for a boat. I know this is a very high-end car, but I don't know, this still amuses me. This car has a neat little period feature that I liked. There is the dealer tag, Harry Anderson, who apparently had dealerships in Hollywood and Beverly Hills. Anyway, the body style, as I said, is billed as a two-seater, but there is some step plates back here, so there is a rumble seat, so you can take a couple of extra people if you really want to. At the time, Marmon was really competing against Duesenberg. This is before E.L. Cord got a hold of it and came out with the Duesenberg J, because that car is just kind of on another level. And at the time, one of the Duesenberg slogans was the only thing that could pass a Duesenberg was another Duesenberg. Well, maybe a Marmon could do it. I'm not sure if the camera is really conveying the fact that despite the fact that this is a roadster, this is actually a really massive car. Also, we have Marmon right there on the bumper, so from the front of the car you see the word Marmon no less than 3 times. That little cover right there, that's still a crank opening, so if the battery fails you can crank start this thing. I'm not sure that that was ever done on this car. It did sell for $115,000. 1955 Hudson Italia. You've probably never seen one of these absolutely drop-dead beautiful cars. All right, let me tell you the story. In the early 1950s, Hudson is building sort of this little remembered small car called the Hudson Jet. It's mainly competing with the Nash Rambler. Hudson designer Frank Spring looked at the Jet and thought, you know what, let's do some voodoo here. So he went to Italian coach builder Touring, and they came up with this concept car called the Superjet, based on the Jet platform. The Superjet kind of looked like this. It was enough of a hit that they put the Superjet into production, calling it the Italia, with minimal modifications. Unfortunately, it kind of came in a little bit pricey. Also, this was going on at exactly the same time that Hudson was merging with Nash to form American Motors. The new American Motors had other concerns, and production of the Italia was dropped. Total production for the Hudson Italia was 25. That's right, just 25 cars were made. As you look at this, it's obvious that this is based on a fairly small car. The Hudson Jet was small. If you look back here, there's really no real back seat, and the engine is the Hudson six-cylinder. The Hudson Jet kind of puts me in mind of the Henry J. And, well, actually, now that you think about it, the Henry J was used as the basis for the Kaiser Darren design, so there's some more parallels. Oh, by the way, look at the roof cutouts for the door opening. That's cool. Anyway, the car that you're looking at then is essentially a very limited production concept car. Especially for 1955, this really looks like nothing else on the road. It was bid at the auction to $300,000, but not enough to meet the reserve. The car is still available, priced at $400,000. All right, here's a Ford. This is actually a 1905 Ford Model C. About this period of time, the Ford Motor Company was moving in really two directions simultaneously. Ford was trying to build a less expensive everyman car, whereas he was getting pressure from his stakeholders to build more expensive cars. The reasonably priced Model A in 1903 was followed up by a very expensive Model B. These two cars were built at the same time. The Model A was replaced with this car, the Model C, which was another reasonably priced car. What was the expensive line of cars kind of culminated in the Model K. The more reasonably priced line, represented here by the Model C, eventually developed into the Models N, R, and S. Really essentially the same car with three different body styles. The NRS design led directly to the Model T design, and really the rest is history after that. There's more to the story, but that's the highlights. Anyway, this is a very nice car. This is a side entrance tonneau with a two-cylinder engine under the seat. The car changed hands for $69,000. Hey, let's do another 1950s convertible. Those are nice. This one's from the early 1950s. This is a 1952 Studebaker Commander State convertible. The Commander was the higher end of the Studebaker line in 52, above the Champion. This one has a rare radio factory option. That is a Stratoline push-button radio. Although factory radios had been around for a while at this point, they're still really more the exception than the rule. Actually, the car is fairly highly optioned with accessory mirrors and bumper guards front and rear. It also has a whole raft of other options, including the deluxe steering wheel and those backup lights that you're looking at there, also fog lights up front. The car sold at auction for $20,125. I've always liked the design for this year's Chrysler. This is a 1937 Chrysler Royal convertible sedan. Despite the Royal name, the C16 Royal was the lower end of the Chrysler line in 37, below the C14 Imperial that was built on a longer wheelbase. This one is also equipped with a radio, which in 1937 is very rare. This is a convertible sedan, so those B pillars that you're seeing, those actually remove when the top goes down. That way, when the top is up, you can roll the windows up and have that fully enclosed comfort, unlike maybe an earlier touring car would have. I really super like the fact that this center light in the back, that's the same motif as the grille in the front, only smaller. So it's like a little smaller version of the front. It's cool. These cars were decent sellers for Chrysler in 37. We're not quite out of the Depression yet, but you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, that light ended up being World War II, but what are you going to do? The car sold for $24,150. All right, let's go look at an early Dodge. This is a 1919 Dodge Model 30 touring car. At this point in history, Dodge is doing well as an independent company, and both brothers are still alive. That would unfortunately change in 1920 when John died of pneumonia and then Horace died of cirrhosis. They both had reputations for, we'll say, knowing how to have a good time, and this undoubtedly contributed to their deaths. That top you see there with all the little vertical windows was kind of a Dodge feature at this time, and it kind of helps you spot a Dodge from a distance away. By the time of their deaths, the Dodges had moved their company up into second place right behind Ford. Well, some distance behind Ford. Ford was an unstoppable juggernaut at this point. The Dodge symbol at this point of two interlocking triangles is actually not supposed to be the Star of David to tweak the somewhat anti-Semitic Henry Ford, but those are early machinist symbols. Anyway, this is a very nice example of an early Dodge, and it sold for $13,800. RM Sotheby's was having a cookout during the preview, so I did take a little break from filming here to get myself a burger and brats. You know how it goes. Anyway, back to cars. Up next, we have a 1937 Ford Deluxe convertible sedan. This has the larger 85 horsepower V8. You see the V8 has a little 85 next to it there. So it's got the 85 horsepower rather than the smaller 60 horsepower that Ford was also offering this year. The more powerful engine was, of course, standard on the Deluxe convertible sedan that we're seeing here. Just like that Chrysler Royal that we just looked at, this is a convertible sedan, so that B pillar removes when the top is down. That's the difference between a convertible sedan and a convertible. Ford sedans for $37 were offered with either a slant back or trunk back rear end. As you can see by this hump, this is a trunk back rear end. Although the slant back offers maybe cleaner body lines, this trunk back actually gives you a little bit more space for storing things. The 37 Ford design is actually pretty clean, influenced by the Lincoln Zephyr. This is the first year that Ford is nestling the headlights into the fenders rather than having them separately mounted. This car sold for $63,250. 1936 Pierce Arrow 12 7-passenger sedan. The V12 was offered in two different wheelbases by Pierce Arrow, and the 7-passenger sedan was actually built on a special, even longer wheelbase. This is in addition to the two different wheelbases offered for their V8. That's a lot going on for a company that's not selling very many cars. In fact, total Pierce Arrow production for 36 was actually less than 800 in total. Production for this particular body style was six cars. You can see where the problem is here. Over at Packard, they had produced a less expensive junior model that really saved the company and helped them get through the Depression. Management over at Pierce Arrow didn't want to cheapen their brand by offering less expensive cars. Well, I mean, this is what happens. You get to make some very nice cars, and make no mistake about it, this is a very nice car. But you only get to make 6 of them. At this point, even though the economy maybe is starting to recover a little bit, Pierce is on the wrong end of the economics of scale, and there's no coming back from that. 1938 would be their final year. Anyway, this auction was an opportunity to own a very rare and very high-end Pierce Arrow. The car changed hands for $59,800. Let's look at a couple of Cadillac hood ornaments. This little lady right here is called the Flying Goddess. This particular one is, I believe incorrectly, mounted on a 1930 LaSalle. Here's a little more modern looking version of her mounted on this 1936 Cadillac. The Goddess was used for a number of years and is really the quintessential pre-war Cadillac hood ornament. But before that they used a heron for a couple of years. But before that, they had this guy called the Herald, or sometimes referred to as the Tooter. Because, he's tooting. Anyway, the Herald was only used in 1929, 1 year only, to herald the new 29 models. He appears here on a 28 Cadillac, which may not be accurate. Maybe if it's like a late 28, I don't know. I'm not going to point at somebody else's high-end car and yell, impure, impure. Actually, let's take a closer look at this Cadillac Sport Phaeton. It has dual air horns. The auction write-up that I have calls the car abundantly accessorized, and I would tend to agree. As a matter of personal taste, I kind of like to keep accessories to a minimum. But, especially living in the Model T world, there's a lot of accessories available, and some people tend to go a little wild. And you know what? That's perfectly all right. This second cowl and windshield are, by the way, not original to the car. Remember, this is a hobby, so at its base, it should be fun. So if you have a personal taste where more is more, have at. That is a perfectly valid choice. It's actually equally valid to my preferred, more minimalistic approach. Anyway, this kind of flamboyant Cadillac did change hands for $69,000. Here's a hood ornament you should recognize right away. This little lady is called the Spirit of Ecstasy, and she appears on Rolls Royces. All right, let's talk about this car, but first, let's set the scene. 1929, Marlene Dietrich stars in the movie The Blue Angel. It's directed by Joseph von Sternberg. It's a hit and catapults her to stardom. The newly minted star signs a 2-picture deal with Paramount. She gets off the train in Hollywood, and von Sternberg meets her at the station with a dozen roses, a checking account with $10,000 in it, and this 1930 Rolls-Royce Phantom 1. Her next film was Morocco, and this car played a prominent role in that film. She, of course, went on to continue to be a big star and was photographed many times with this car. This is an American-made Springfield Rolls-Royce. The unique body was made by coach builders Hibbard and Darren and is called a transformal Fayette. Among the unique features of the car are this V-shaped windshield, and you can see that is split in the middle so that you can fold out part of the windshield to let a little bit more air in. Also, the top is unique with these trapezoidal windows. The car is 100% correct, with a reported $500,000 spent on the restoration. It did change hands at the auction today for a sale price of $410,000. With all this talk about hood ornaments, let's just look at some loose ones they had for sale at the auction. These glass ones are the work of French glass artist René Lalique. He did his work in the 1930s in France. When World War II rolled around, this eagle that you're looking at in particular gained a reputation for being widely appropriated by German officers for use on staff cars, since the eagle represented symbols commonly used by Germany at the time. The dragonfly is cool. I'm not sure if I've ever seen that one in person or not. I'm kind of a fan of Lalique. I'm not going to give prices on these since they sold individually, but the values ranged from a couple of thousand up to $5,400 for that dragonfly. See, I had suspected that was the rare one, and I was right. All right, enough about hood ornaments. Let's go back to cars. All right, let's talk about this Stoddard Dayton. We don't see those very often. This is a 1909 Model 9A Touring. The company was founded by brothers John and Charles Stoddard in, well, Dayton, Ohio. They started manufacturing automobiles in 1904. They quickly gained a reputation for making a very high-quality, well-engineered car. The year after this car was made, in 1910, the brothers joined a man named Benjamin Briscoe. Briscoe was forming a General Motors competitor called United States Motor Company, and Stoddard Dayton became part of that. U.S. Motors unfortunately failed and took several car companies with it. The only one to really make it out alive was Maxwell. Maxwell, of course, went on to become a foundation stone for another GM competitor, Chrysler Corporation. Anyway, this very well-engineered 1909 Stoddard Dayton sold for $92,000. All right, I've got to do at least one truck, come on. This is a 1935 Chevrolet Model EB canopy bed. What that means is what you would consider to be the regular truck bed has this steel canopy over it with these roll-down canvas sides. It was a really unique delivery vehicle, and popular too. It's a great-looking truck. The previous year, in 1934, was the first year that Chevrolet actually gave the truck its own unique cab and front sheet metal. That meant that the truck is actually its own thing. It's not just the truck version of the car. It wasn't just the sheet metal, though. The truck also got its own half-ton frame. Anyway, this thing is just a really nice-looking, solid, honest truck. It sold for $22,000. Hey, I told you I'd come back for that Packard Caribbean, and here it is. I didn't forget. This great 1956 Caribbean convertible with the standard tricolor paint is probably among the best that Packard offered post-war. Unfortunately, it would also be among the last. The merger with Studebaker was not going well. Packard was not seeing a bright light at the end of the tunnel. It was only seeing a bright light to walk into. The Packard name would continue for 2 more years, really as rebadged Studebakers, and then disappear forever. They did leave behind a legacy of some fantastic cars, though, this being one of them. Oh, look at those dual radio antennas. Jeez. This high-quality masterpiece from the twilight of Packard changed hands for $80,500. Hey, I told you I'd find you a muscle car, and here it is. Actually, I think this is going to have to be my last car of the video because obviously I'm losing the light. This is a 1970 Pontiac GTO, originally built with the Judge package. Not only was the Judge package an appearance package, but also a performance package. It included the 400 cubic inch V8 with Ram Air, making 365 horsepower. There are a number of Judge clones out there, but this is the real thing. Unfortunately, this is not numbers matching. The original engine at some point was pulled. It's been retrofitted with another 400 V8 from a 1969 GTO. Anyway, I'm always amused by the fact that the Judge package on the GTO was named after a running courtroom-based gag on the comedy show Laugh-In, where Flip Wilson would repeat the line, "Here come the judge." I actually remember that sketch pretty vividly from watching Laugh-In when I was a kid. I mean, it was in reruns. I'm old, but I'm not quite that old. Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me. Anyway, I think you're really seeing this in what I think is great light, because a car like this was really meant to be driven out at night and viewed under the street lights. You could take this car out to your own Saturday night cruise, but it would have cost you $66,125. Well, I hope you enjoyed that small taste of some of the cars offered at the RM Sotheby's Hershey auction. Anyway, if you like this channel, go ahead and subscribe. There should be a link right about there for you to do that. Or look at some of my other videos. There's some fantastic ones back there. There's a link right about there for you to do that. Until next time, I'll talk to you later.